And hi, I am Pam Fox, and we're live streaming on YouTube. Welcome back to my channel where we're doing a Bible study in the book of Genesis. And today we are in chapter 42. Move this out of the way. So really quick, as always, I like to do a little bit of a recap where we're at in the book of Genesis. So last week we left off chapter 21, chapter 41. And of course, we're in the life of Joseph. And in chapter 41, we saw that it had been 2 years. 2 years had gone by after Joseph had basically interpreted the dream of the baker and the butler. And the dreams were one, right? The dream was basically you're both going to be released from prison. You're going to go back to the king's palace. He's going to throw this big feast. One of you is going to be restored. The butler was restored to his position, and the baker was hung. He was killed. So all of that came to pass. And Joseph told the butler before he left, don't forget me. He did forget him. 2 years went by, and then Pharaoh has 2 dreams in the night, and he calls all of his magicians to come and try to interpret these dreams. They can't do it. So they call Joseph, and he tells him the 2 dreams you have are one. So we have this theme or this pattern of these double dreams, which we talked about last week, which is just my little kind of, I don't know. I just feel like when there's a pattern in the Bible, it's trying to tell us something. And there were 3 instances of double dreams here in this story. One was when Joseph dreamt about these bundles of wheat bowing before his bundle of wheat, the 11 bundles of wheat bowing before his. And then he saw the sun and the moon and 11 stars bow before him. And so it was one prophecy about, it was prophetic that in the future, his family would bow before him, not to mention a nation, because the stars are very representative of a multitude. The grains are very representative of a multitude. They're also representative of his family, but it doesn't have to be either or it can be both. And so it's this prophecy that his family and a multitude, a nation, would bow before him. And then we saw the double dream with the butler and the baker. And then Pharaoh has a double dream in the night. So we see this double dream. And all I was saying last week was, if it looks like the end times are starting to ramp up and you start to have a double dream in the night, maybe the Lord is trying to tell you something. I've never had any dreams, prophetic dreams like that, but I would think that if I had a double dream and I felt like the Lord was trying to tell me something, and I wonder if the Lord's trying to tell me something. This pattern here in this story of Genesis tells us that this is one of the ways God spoke through people. So anyway, Pharaoh has a double dream, and finally they bring Joseph out of prison, and he interprets it. He says there's going to be 7 years of famine, followed 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. So there's going to be 7 years of bumper crops, just massive amounts of food, followed by 7 years of a grievous, it says, famine. And so he puts him in charge of everything and basically tells him, you're in charge. He puts his signet ring on his finger, puts the coat on him. Because Joseph tells him what God is about to do, he has shown you. He has shown the Pharaoh. And so he puts him in charge of everything. He just says Joseph rises to power. It says he made him ride in the chariot. So he takes Joseph through town with the gold and the ring and the cloak, and he tells him there is no one in Egypt greater than you except for me. And he says he takes him, puts him on the chariot, and he tells everyone bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. So we can see that prophecy already starting to come to pass, where all the land of Egypt is bowing before Joseph. And it says Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And it says there were 7 plenteous years where the earth brought forth by the handfuls. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. So they stopped counting. There was so much food, and they were storing it away. They were storing away a fifth, but there was so much food that even a fifth was a lot of food to carry them through that 7 years of famine. So it was without number. And then basically, they had these 7 years. Joseph has a couple of kids with his wife, And then the famine begins and people start getting hungry and they're coming to the Pharaoh and they're like, we're hungry, we need food. And he basically says, see Joseph. Joseph is the man I've put in charge of that. And it says the famine was over all the face of the earth. I think that's important to recognize. It wasn't just there in Egypt. It was there in the land of Canaan where Joseph's family was. But it says it was over all the face of the earth. And he opened the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And it says, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn because that the famine was so sore in all the land. So that's chapter 41. Where it's ending the chapter telling us all the countries came into Egypt. So the word got out. There's food in Egypt. All right, so let's get into chapter 42. And if we have time, we'll go ahead because chapters 42 and 43, really the next 3 chapters are all one story. And it's hard to kind of break it up and wait, to see, although you can read it. If you've not read the story before, open up a Bible and read it. But if we have time, we'll go through 2 chapters today because it's really all one story. And then we'll have a little bit of a cliffhanger leading into chapter 44. We'll see how much time we have. So chapter 42, verse 1, here we go. Now, when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do ye look one upon another? So right away, I think this is funny because it doesn't say how much time has gone by in terms of where they're at in the famine. But the famine was across the entire land. Everything would have dried up. There would have been no rain. The crops would have died. The people would have been hungry. The animals would have been hungry. I mean, they would have had food stored away because that was customary to store food away. Things like nuts, things they could store in vessels, things they could cure, grain, of course, for themselves and for the animals. So those foods probably, at this point in the story, it says, when Jacob saw there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look upon one another? He has heard rumor that there's food in Egypt. He knows that there's a big problem going on. Everybody's hungry. Everybody's suffering. And he's basically saying, why are you just sitting here staring at each other? You're doing nothing. And if you do nothing, we're going to die. Verse 2, and he said, behold, I have heard there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. So basically, he's telling his sons, go to Egypt and get corn. If you don't, we're going to die. Things aren't getting better. They're only getting worse. And they're probably, the food storages that they have are really dwindling. And when you're in a situation like that, you can start looking at your food and going, I think we've only got this much time left based on how much food we have before we start dying. We have to start butchering and eating the animals because we can't feed them. And once those are gone, there's just really no food left if things continue the way they are. And of course, they wouldn't know how long this is going to last. They didn't know it's going to last 7 years. But whether they're deep into the first year or into the second year, they know that it's been hard and they know that they're running out of food. So Jacob basically tells his sons, go to Egypt and get food. Verse 3, and Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief befall him. In other words, I'm not sending Jacob or Benjamin. He sent the other 10 brothers. But remember, Benjamin, he had 2 boys with Rachel, the wife that he loved. He thinks Joseph is dead, and all he has left is Benjamin, his youngest son. And Rachel's dead. Remember, she died giving birth to Benjamin. So he's saying he's sending the 10, but he's keeping Benjamin with him. And he says, lest peradventure mischief befall him, which just means, they were traveling from Canaan to Egypt, which was, I looked it up. It could be anywhere from 300 to 400 miles walking. They could have been on, they were on camels. It says asses, donkeys. So even then it could have taken, under the best circumstances, it might have taken 12 days, but it probably realistically took even longer than that. They could have been attacked by robbers. They could have been attacked by wild animals. You just never know on a trek like that what could go wrong. And he didn't want to risk losing Benjamin too. So he sends all 10 of his sons, but he keeps Benjamin. Verse 5. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land. and it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed themselves down before him with their faces to the earth. So again, we see that prophecy being fulfilled when Joseph bowed before the lands, before the nations, and now not Joseph bowed, but the nations bowed before Joseph, and now his brethren are bowing before him. It says, so remember, Joseph was one that put in charge of all of this, so they would have come before Joseph, or maybe he would have just been, just kind of looking out over the lines of people that were coming in, and he recognized his brothers. But when they would come up, to say, we want to buy grain, they would bow down. They would humble themselves. It's not like they were worshiping him, but it was a posture of humility. It was a posture of pleading. It was a posture of, we have come here, we're dying, we need food, and you've got it, and we're here to buy it. So they bowed before him with their faces to the earth. In verse 7, it says, and Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, which is just a weird way of saying he made himself a stranger. In other words, he didn't say, hey guys, it's me, Joseph. He made himself a stranger, and he recognized his brothers, but his brothers didn't recognize him, because remember, he was an Egyptian now, which means he looked like an Egyptian. Egyptians, even the males, they wore makeup. I actually read a really interesting article. If you want to look at it, just Google ancient Egyptian men. It's called Ancient Egyptian Men Used Eye Makeup for Many Reasons. It's on the ancientpages.com, and it goes through all the different reasons that people wore makeup. And it wasn't just for beautification, although that was part of it. There were many other reasons, but the men and the women both wore makeup, including eye makeup, lots of eyeliner. A lot of times they would wear shadow. And you guys have seen this before in frescoes or different images that we see that still exist today. But they wouldn't have recognized Joseph, because he would have been wearing makeup, and he would have had on maybe a crown, and he would have had on, maybe even a wig, and he would have had on royal clothing and jewelry and all of that stuff. He might have even had, I don't know, markings and things. So, and it's been a minute since they've seen him. It's been, I forget the math, but it could be anywhere between 15 and 20 years at this point, when the brothers finally come into Egypt. So it's been a while. He recognizes them. They do not recognize him. So it says he made himself strange unto them. And he says it back at verse 7, it says, and spake roughly unto them. So he wasn't nice to them. He wasn't like, oh, it's nice to meet you guys. Oh, you need food. Okay, get in line and we'll set you up. He says he spake roughly unto them. So they were afraid. It says, and he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. He wants to know, where are you guys from? They would have looked different than the Egyptians, because they were Hebrews. So he's like, where are you guys from? They said, we're from Canaan. We're here to buy food. It says, and Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, ye are spies to see the nakedness of the land. So, I can only presume that Joseph has carried a lot of anger over the years towards his brothers. He's really had to deal with the hatred that he's felt for them, kind of the bittersweetness. They're his brothers, they're his family. He probably misses them, but they threw him in a pit and they tortured him, and then they sold him into slavery, even though he begged them not to. And so he's carried that all these years, although it did say that when his sons were born, that there was a lot of healing through that. But you can't just make that go away. And so now, his first response is he's angry with his brothers. Here they are. He's angry with them. He speaks roughly to them. He asks them, where are you from? And he's remembering his dreams, that's prophetic dream that they would bow before him. And now they're bowing before him. And so I think he wants to get a little bit of revenge on his brothers for everything that they did to them. He's kind of reacting, kind of this knee-jerk reaction of vengefulness and spitefulness. So he makes this claim. He says, you're spies to see the nakedness of the land. Now, this probably would have been a pretty serious accusation to call someone spies, and you probably would have needed some kind of proof. You can't just call someone a spy, although he probably could have got away with it if he wanted them to be arrested. He probably could have done that. But we're going to see here now, he's going to really mess with his brothers in accusing them of being spies and forcing them to prove that they're not spies. So he says, "You're spies to see the nakedness of the land, ye are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my Lord, but to buy food are thy servants come." They're like, "No, we're not spies." they understand this is a serious, accusation. They're like, "No, no, 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 we're here to buy food." He says, "We are," and then they go on to say, "We are all one man's sons. We are true men," which means we're not spies, we're good guys. "Thy servants are not spies," it says, verse 12. "And he said unto them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land ye are come." So they're arguing back and forth. He's saying, "You're spies." They're like, "We're not spies." "Yes, you're spies." They're like, "No, we're not spies. We're good guys." Verse 13, "And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not." So for some reason they feel, and maybe he asked them more questions, but they're giving a lot of information there. Like, yeah, we're 12 sons. Our father's back in Canaan. Our youngest brother is there. Oh, and we have this other brother, but he's dead. So they're giving all this information. Verse 14, "And Joseph said unto them, That is it that I spake unto you, saying, Ye are spies." He's basically saying, I've declared that you're spies. I've said it. I've made the accusation. "Hereby ye shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither." So he's basically saying, I've made the accusation. I believe you're spies. You're going to have to prove it otherwise. And he says, here's how to prove it. Go back home and bring back this brother you speak of, this youngest brother. I want to see him. You have to prove it. Verse 16, "Send one of you and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely ye are spies." So he's sticking to his guns. He's saying, you're spies. I know it. You're going to have to prove it otherwise. We're going to send one of you to go get your brother and bring him back. The rest of you are going to stay here in prison. So that's what he says. But that's not what ends up happening. What ends up happening, verse 17, it says, "And he put them all together into ward 3 days." So I'm not really sure if this was custom for this accusation. You've been accused of being a spy, you go to prison for 3 days. And it doesn't even say prison, it says into ward, which would have meant that someone is watching over them, like a guard would have been keeping watch over them. It doesn't say that they were in Pharaoh's or in Joseph's house. It doesn't say that they were in the prison. It just says into ward. So for 3 days they were put under guard and into ward. And maybe Joseph did it because he needed time to cool off and figure out what he wanted to do next. Maybe he did it because he thought if he put them in prison for 3 days, that would be enough time for them to think about the whole situation. And maybe, I don't know, maybe he was hoping at the end of 3 days, they'd be like, oh, we're horrible people. We should have never done this to our brother Joseph. I don't know. I mean, I can only imagine after all these years that Joseph really was wanting to hear his brothers say, we were wrong and we're sorry, and to get that validation. I would imagine he was really longing for that. When somebody does something and you believe it's totally wrong and you're innocent, right? And maybe you cry every night about it and you have no control. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, maybe you've been in situations like that. I know I certainly have been. In fact, I'm going through a situation kind of like that right now where I have no control over the situation unless I do something that is outside of my own values and belief systems in order to change the situation. So I just have to wait. I just have to wait for the Lord and wait for him to resolve the situation and be patient. And it's really hard and it's really painful. It's very difficult when you want to, resolve a situation and you can't. So Joseph's been waiting for this resolve. He's been waiting for this reconciliation. He's been waiting for that validation. And now here his brothers are before him and he's put them into jail. Maybe it's to give them time to think. It doesn't really say why, but it says he puts them into ward for 3 days together. Verse 18, and Joseph said unto them the third day, this do and live, for I fear God. So he's telling them, here's the plan, guys. You can do it and you'll live. He says, for I fear God. Now, this is interesting that he mentions I fear God, because his brothers were supposedly men who also feared God. And this was the custom of the Hebrews. Their understanding is there's one God, the God of their fathers, the God who created all things, and the God who they were expected to humble themselves before and to fear, because he's the only God and he created all things and he can do all things. And Joseph is saying here, I fear God. Now in Egypt, they would have had many gods. They would have different gods for different, things that, that had different meanings. And yeah, there was a humility that you had to express before God, and you had, you bow before the idols and worship and that. But Joseph is saying, I mean, he could have said a lot of things. He could have said, I believe in God. He could have said, the power of God. He says, I fear God. So he says, do this and live, for I fear God, which kind of indicates that this plan, it's not just from his own vengeful heart, that he did pray about it, but he did ask God, what am I supposed to do with these three guys? They're in jail. And so maybe the Lord did come to him and say, this is what I want you to do. Because we're going to see here what he tells him to do is different than what he first told him to do, which was to send one person back and bring your brother, and the rest will stay in prison. Verse 19, he says, if ye be true men, that's just to say good guys, honest guys, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses. But bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. So the new plan, he's telling them, I'm going to keep one of you here in prison. Instead of sending one and keeping the rest, he's going to send them all and keep the one, because he wants to send food back to Canaan, right? If he just sends one, how much food can he carry? He's not going to be able to carry as much food as 9 would be able to carry. So he keeps the one and he sends the 9. And we're going to see he's going to load them up with grain and send them back to Canaan. But he wants them to bring Benjamin back. So that's the deal. It says, and they did so. Verse 21. And they said to one another, and by the way, they're still there in the presence of Joseph when they're having this conversation that I'm about to read. And they said to one another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother. And of course, they're talking about Joseph. So now they've had 3 days in jail, and they are feeling guilty, and they are looking at the big picture, and they're feeling like maybe all of this has come upon us for a reason and we deserve it. So they said to one another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother. And they're talking to each other. In that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. So they're remembering that day when they threw Joseph in the pit, and he screamed and cried, and they just sat there around their campfire and ate and talked and listened to him in the distance, begging, please let me out, please let me out. And then probably when they sold him into slavery, it was probably the same thing. What are you guys doing? Don't do this. Please, I beg you. As he watched them exchange money and place him in the, guard of these Ishmaelites, and off they went to Egypt, probably kicking and screaming the whole way. Possibly. He might have even been beaten by the Ishmaelites to get him to shut up. I mean, it doesn't say, I'm just, elaborating here, but they remembered, it says, the anguish of his soul when he besought us, which means they remembered Joseph's anguish when that word besought is to basically to beg for mercy. He would have been begging them to show mercy on him and to not do these horrible things. So they remembered this, and he says, therefore is this distress come upon us. They believe that everything that's happening now, they've been accused of being spies. There's a famine in the land. Their dad is back in Canaan, starving to death. Now they're being told they have to go all the way back to Canaan and bring back Benjamin, and they know their dad's not going to go for that. They already know that, because that's what he already said, you're not taking Benjamin with you. And they know how much he loves Benjamin. So this is a difficult situation for these men. Verse 22. And Reuben was the one that saved Joseph's life. They wanted to kill him. They put him in the pit. They wanted to kill him. And Reuben was like, no, let's not kill him. He talked them out of it. So verse 22, and Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. So Reuben's basically pulling I told you so. He's basically, I told you guys, I told you not to do that. They're basically saying, all of this is happening to us because we're guilty for what we did to Joseph. And Reuben saying, I told you guys. So I just think it's kind of funny. But verse 23, it says, and they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. So Joseph is overhearing this entire conversation. He speaks Hebrew, but he speaks the native language in Egypt there as well. They would have taught him the language, and that's the language that he speaks. So he overhears this entire conversation. So remember what I was saying before. He's probably been yearning and longing for years for that validation, for that, I'm sorry, you guys, I'm sorry, Joseph, we were so wrong. Could you ever forgive us? We should have never done that. I can't believe we were so stupid. He's been waiting for that validation. And now he's kind of hearing it, because they're basically saying that we're guilty. Verily guilty concerning our brother. That's what they say. As they remember his anguish and him begging for mercy. Verse 24, and he turned himself, this is Joseph, he turned himself about from them, and he wept, and returned to them again, and communed with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes. So Joseph gets so emotional overhearing this conversation, this validation that he's been waiting for years, that he starts to weep. And of course, he's the Lord of the land. He has to present a certain degree of authority. So he turns. He might have even removed himself from wherever they were. But it says he turns, and then he says he returned to them again, and he says he talks with them, and basically says, I'm going to take Simeon. And it says, and bound him before their eyes. So he probably tells the guards, I'll take that one, and they, maybe they tie him up or whatever. So again, these guys would have been kind of freaking out about all of this. Verse 25, then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. So basically, Joseph commands his people not only to fill all their grain sacks and send them back to Canaan, but to put the money that they had paid. Remember, the grain's not free. They bought it. But to put that money back in their grain sacks, which would have been a curious thing to do, because money goes in a coin purse, and it would have been coins like gold and silver. Wouldn't have been paper money. And grain goes in a grain sack. And so they put the grain in there, and they put the money in where you would open up the grain sack, put it there in the top. And they didn't know about it, which we're going to find out. We'll go ahead and keep going here. So verse 26, and they ladded their asses with corn and departed thence. And they gave him provisions too, which would have been food and water for the trip. So he really sets them up and sets them on their way out of his love for them. Verse 27, and as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the inn, he espied his money, for behold, it was in his sack's mouth. So they stopped to take a break to feed the animals. They open up the sack to get out some grain, and there's money in there. Verse 28, and he said unto his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God hath done unto us? So again, they really are feeling the guilt of what they did to Joseph. They're feeling that everything that's happening right now, which would have been really strange. I mean, they stopped to feed their animals, and there was money in the grain sack. The money that particular man, it doesn't say which man, does it? So it says one of them. The money that he gave up to pay for his portion of grain was there in the sack. So they're saying, what is God doing to us? They think they're being punished by God. Verse 29, and they came unto Jacob their father unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell unto them, saying, The man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us and took for us spies of the country. So they're telling their dad now what happened. And we said unto him, we are true men, we are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, hereby shall I know that ye are true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me, then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So I will deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. So they're basically telling their dad, this Lord of the land, he was mean to us. He took Simeon. He sent us back here to retrieve Benjamin, to prove that we're not spies. He thinks we're a bunch of bad guys. And so we're back, but we got to take Benjamin back to Egypt. Verse 35, and it came to pass as they emptied their sacks that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. Okay, so the coins probably weren't loose there in, it says a bundle of money. So it probably would have been wrapped up maybe in some fabric and tied off. Each man's payment, it was put back. Probably the actual payment that they handed over was dropped back into the sacks. I'd missed that part before. It was a bundle of money. When you see it, if you watch the movie Joseph, when they cut into the bags and they open up and all this grain spills out with all these gold coins. So it was these bundles. Sometimes it's really easy to kind of mix up what's actually said in the scriptures with what you've seen in a theatrical movie of the same story. But it says they were afraid. So again, this idea that they're freaking out, they're scared. They're not really sure what's going on. And Jacob their father said unto them, me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. So now Jacob is kind of chiming in, and he's complaining and crying and whining and grieving. He's lost Joseph. Now he's lost Simeon. He's about to lose Benjamin. And he's really blaming it on these sons. He says, me have ye bereaved of my children. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my two sons, if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. So Reuben, I would imagine emotions are really high at this point. They're like, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Reuben chimes in and says, you can kill my sons if I don't bring Benjamin back home. He wants to take Benjamin back to Joseph to prove they're not spies, retrieve their brother, come home, and brings Benjamin back safely. And he's basically saying, you can kill my two sons if I don't do that. Which, I doubt if that's what he really meant. Again, I think the emotions were really high. I can't imagine, if this had played out and he, let's say Benjamin dies in this whole ordeal, and Reuben comes back and says, sorry, Benjamin died. I doubt if Jacob would have been like, let's kill my grandsons. I don't think that's what they're saying here. I think that Reuben is highly emotional, and he's basically trying to prove to his dad, I can bring Benjamin back safely. And he's leaving his sons as collateral, in a sense. Verse 38. And he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. So he's basically saying he's my only son left, which I think is awful. He has all his sons standing there, and he's basically saying, Joseph's dead. If you take Benjamin and anything happens to him, that's going to be the end of the world, even though he's got all these 10 other sons there. But Joseph and Benjamin were his favorite because Rachel was his favorite. She was the one that he loved from day one. So he says, no, you can't take Benjamin. He says, because his brother is dead and he is left alone. He's basically saying Benjamin's my only son. He's left alone. He's not alone. He's got 10 other brothers. So I think this is a horrible thing for Jacob to say. It is a horrible thing. But he goes on to say, if mischief befall him by the way in which ye go, so in other words, if something bad happens to him on this trip, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. In other words, he's basically saying, if my son Benjamin dies before me, it will kill me. It will kill me. I can't do it. So let's keep going. Since we have a little bit of time, we'll go into chapter 43. It says, and the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, go again, buy us a little food. So they didn't go back. Some time has passed. It doesn't say how much long. But it says when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt. So it's probably not all gone, but again, they're probably looking at it going, it's just a matter of time. This food's going to be gone. And so Jacob says, you got to go back. He says, go again, buy us a little food. And that's interesting that he words it that way. Buy us a little food. I don't think he wants to talk about the Benjamin situation again. He's basically telling his kids, we need food. Go get us more food. Verse 3, and Judah. So now we have Judah, one of the brothers. Judah spake unto him, saying, the man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. So Judah chimes in, and he talks about the elephant in the room. If we go back, we have to bring Benjamin with us, or we won't. They're not going to give us any food. Verse 4, if thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. So I don't think this is an ultimatum here. It's what it sounds like. I think he's just laying it out. He's laying out the facts. If you're sending us, there's no point in us going all the way back to Egypt if we don't take Benjamin with us, because the Lord of the land said, you're not even going to see my face unless Benjamin is with you. So no, we're not going to go unless you let can we take Benjamin with us? Because there's no point. Verse 6, and Israel said, that's Jacob, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me as to tell the man whether ye yet had a brother? He's basically saying, how could you do this to me? Like, why did you even have to tell them you had a brother? Why did you give them all that information? And they said, the man asked us straightly of our state and of our kindred, saying, is your father yet alive? Which we don't see that in the scriptures, but I don't think he's lying. I would bet that that's what Joseph did ask, because he probably wanted to know if his dad was still alive. He loved his father very much. So he probably did ask, is your father living? So he says, is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? And again, we didn't see that in the scripture, but I bet that's exactly what happened, because he wanted to know if Benjamin was still alive. And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, bring down your brother? So Judah's basically saying, he asked us all these questions. We simply answered truthfully. How are we to know that he was going to demand we go all the way back to Canaan and bring back this younger brother to prove we weren't spies? How are we to know that? So Jacob's kind of coming down hard on them right now and accusing them of being, he says, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me? He's like, why are you being so cruel to me? And they're like, we're not. We just answered the man's questions. He was cruel to us. We don't know why. Verse 8, and Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. So Judah is really on behalf of his children. He's saying if we don't go and get food, we're all going to die, even our grandchildren, our family, our bloodline, our clan. We're all going to die. We have to get food, period. We just have to. We have to do what we have to do. Verse 9. He says, I will be surety for him. That's insurance. He says, I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. So Judah is really standing up here, and he's saying, look, we have to go to Egypt or we're going to die. All of us. I will take responsibility for Benjamin personally, he says. So he's really trying to reassure his father, he'll be with me. I won't let him out of my sight. If anything, puts him in danger, I'm going to be the one that's going to protect him and make sure that I bring him personally back and set him before you. And if not, you can blame me. No matter what happens, it'll be my fault. So he really takes responsibility here. And then he goes on to say, verse 10, for except we had lingered, surely now we had returned the second time. So in other words, he's saying, if we'd just gone back, as soon as we got home, we'd be back by now and this would all be resolved. So let's not delay any longer, is basically what he's saying. Verse 11, and their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels and carry down the man a present, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And by the way, if you're wondering, I thought there was a famine in the land. Evidently, they still had a little bit of food. These would have been cured foods, dried foods, stored foods that they would have been rationing in this famine. But they can tell, how much longer. They can look at the food on the shelf or in the pantry and know it's going to last us. They have a whole clan there. It's not just the 12 sons and Jacob. There's all the people in their household, all their cattle they have to feed. The land is dried up. It's not raining, but they would have had these food stores. So there's a little bit left, and he wants him to put together a little care package, a little present to give to the king, this lord of the land, which would have been custom, to be in good graces, to bring a present. And what better present than food? But they need corn. They need grain. They need food that's calorically dense, that can sustain them long term, their family and their livestock. They need the grain. So verse 12, and take double money in your hand, and the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks. Carry it again in your hand, peradventure it was an oversight. Just in case it was an oversight. So nobody knows why or how this money got put back in their grain sacks, but Jacob is saying, take double money. So you're going to pay for the grain you're going to go buy, but you're going to pay for the grain that you didn't pay for last time. He's saying, peradventure it was an oversight. He's hoping it was just a mistake, that all this money was put back in the bags. I mean, what else could it be? Verse 13, he says, take also your brother, and arise, go again unto the man, and God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your older brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So he's basically saying, we have to do this thing. We're going to die if we don't. We have to go get food. There's food in Egypt. We've got to go get it. And if it means they have to take Benjamin, then that's what it means. And he says, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. He's really just kind of coming to terms that, yeah, he may lose Benjamin too, but it's either do this one thing that might save the whole clan, including Benjamin. He has to kind of weigh out the pros and cons. He says, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved, but he's got to do it. Verse 15, and the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand and Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, bring these men home and slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. So he sees his brothers, they're back. And it doesn't say how much time has gone by, but it's been a significant amount of time, maybe a couple of months. We don't know. But Joseph's been waiting. He's been waiting, looking on the horizon for that band of brothers. Now he sees them, and he knows exactly what he's going to do. And he gives the order to the ruler of his house to take them back to his home, slay a cow or whatever it is, prepare a meal. He says at noon, we're going to eat together. So Joseph's going to be home, and they're going to dine together at noon. Verse 17, and the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may see occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for bondmen, and our asses. A bondman is a slave. So they think they're going to be just like, they've been taken away, and they think they're going to be taken captive, put into slavery, and that's the end of it. Verse 19, and they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house. So here they're going to really kind of lay out their story and beg this steward of the house, Joseph's, first in command, for mercy, because they think they're done for, which isn't the case, but they don't know that. Verse 20, and said, "Oh, sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass when we came to the inn that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand." And they're like, "See, we've got the money. We didn't steal. We're not bad guys. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks." They're like, "We don't get it either. We don't know how it happened." And they're basically saying, "We're sorry, but we didn't do it. We're innocent." It says, "We cannot tell who put money in our sacks." And he said, so this is the ruler of Joseph's house. And he said, "Peace be to you. Fear not. Peace be to you, fear not." So he's basically telling them, calm down, calm down. You don't have to be scared. It's going to be okay. He says, "Peace be to you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." And he brought Simeon out unto them. Let's break this down really quick. Peace be to you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father have given you treasure in your sacks. So he basically tells them to calm down. He says, it's your God that restored your money into your sacks. But then he goes on in the next breath and says, "I had your money." So now we know who put the money in their sacks. They just got through saying, "We cannot tell you who put money in our sacks." He's saying, "I had your money and God restored it to you." So I think that what this is saying is that Joseph probably went before the Lord and said, "What am I supposed to do?" And I think that the Bible doesn't say this. This is my interpretation. But from this, I think that the Lord told Joseph to have the steward of his household who would have had the money, he would have had that money that they bought the corn with, to put the money back in the sacks. He says it. He says, "I had your money, but it was God that gave you treasure in your sacks." So I think God told him, probably told Joseph, and Joseph told the steward, "Put the money back in the sacks." And that's how it got back in the sacks. He said, "I had your money." And then he says, and he brought Simeon out unto them. So he explains to them, "I'm the one that did it." At least that's the way I interpret it. He says, "I had your money and God restored your money to your sacks." And then out comes Simeon. He's there in the house, in Joseph's house. Remember, Joseph was Lord of the land. He would have lived in a really nice house. And Simeon was there. So it doesn't say that Simeon was there the entire time. We don't know. We don't know if Joseph has been hanging out with him this whole time. Maybe he told him, "Hey, I'm your brother Joseph." And they had this big reconciliation. And now they've been, sharing what's been going on in each other's lives for the past 20 years or however long it's been. I mean, we don't know. It doesn't say. But Simeon was there in the house on that day. And he comes out, verse 24, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. And they made ready the present against Joseph came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. So they were told they were going to have a meal there in Joseph's house with Joseph at noon. So they got the present ready. Joseph's going to be here at noon, and we're all going to sit down and dine together. Verse 26, and when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed themselves to him to the earth. So again, that prophecy being fulfilled, his brothers are bowing down before Joseph. Verse 27, and he asked them of their welfare and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive?" So again, Joseph wants to know, is my dad still alive? And they answered, "Thy servant our father is in good health. He is yet alive." And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. So again, the word obeisance was the word that was used in the dream that Joseph had. He said that these bundles of wheat made obeisance to his bundle of wheat. The 11 bundles of wheat made obeisance to his bundle of wheat. It was the same with the sun and the moon and the stars. It was the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to Joseph. And now we're seeing this word obeisance again. Which I'd have to do a search. I don't know if this is the first time it's used. I always get really interested in the first use of a certain word in the Bible. I think there's probably a certain degree of depth there and meaning or importance that we need to pay attention to. I didn't look that up, but we do see it twice in this story. We see it, or 3 times. We see it with the grain dream. We see it with the sun and the moon and the stars dream. And now we see it being fulfilled. It's that full circle. It says his brothers made obeisance to him. Verse 29, and he lifted up his eyes and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. So he gives Benjamin a little blessing here. He says, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep. And he entered into his chamber and wept there. So again, this idea of his bowels did yearn upon his brother, I think he probably felt sick. He saw Benjamin there. He felt nauseous. Have you ever felt like so upset that you feel like you could throw up, or so scared you kind of feel nauseous? I think he just got super emotional here, and he had to remove it. It said he made haste. I think he ran out of the room. It said he went into his chamber and wept there. It says in verse 31, and he washed his face and he went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. So he took some time, he wept, he washed his face. I'm sure we've all done that before, where we've had to remove ourselves from a situation, calm ourselves down, wash our face with cold water, and then go back into that situation. A hard situation. It says he refrained himself and he said, set on bread. So we're going to see here, he moved him, set himself apart. And we're going to see why, but I'll just kind of paraphrase it really quick. Basically, they're in one room. We know that from the text. They're in one room, maybe one big dining room table, or maybe a variety of tables or sitting areas. But Joseph is in his own area by himself. His brothers are together in another area by themselves. And then the Egyptians are there, which would have been members of his household, are together by themselves. So there's some distance between these three groups, between Joseph, the brothers, and the Egyptians. And it's for a reason. It's because they're not allowed to eat with Hebrews. That was custom. It was against the rules. They could not sit down and eat a meal with the Hebrews. So there's this distance between the groups. Okay, so let's go ahead and read it. It says, and they sat on, the word set on is an idea of sitting down to dine, like when you go into a restaurant or sit down at your dining room table. And they sat on for him by himself, that's Joseph, and for them by themselves, that's the Hebrews, and for the Egyptians, which did eat with them by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So they considered the Hebrews less than. They were an abomination. They weren't worthy to sit at the same table and eat a meal. And this went on a lot in the day. Even the Israelites, the Hebrews, later when they would establish themselves as a nation and they had their own customs, they considered themselves God's chosen holy people, and everyone else they considered Gentiles or abominations, and they wouldn't sit down and have a meal with anyone other than Israelites. So it wasn't just something that the Egyptians did. It was common that you wouldn't sit down and have a meal with someone that you considered unworthy of your own greatness, which obviously is horrible. I mean, yeah. So, fortunately, when we go to the end of the story in our Bibles and we study the book of Revelation, we'll see this phrase over and over and over, every tongue, tribe, and nation. This idea that people will be reconciled and brought back together, and who you are, where you come from, the color of your skin, what nationality, none of that will matter. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that you're covered by the blood of the Lamb in terms of salvation, in terms of entering into this place God has prepared, eternity in his presence, perfection, nirvana, however you want to, paradise, however you want to say it. In order to live in that place and to live forever in the presence of God, you have to be saved, and you can only be saved by the grace of God through your faith in the blood of the Lamb, your faith in Jesus Christ and what he did there at the cross, which was to pour out his blood, which was to die in our place. So that's the good news, that in the end game, nationality, ethnicity, none of that will matter. What language you speak, none of that matters. Every tongue, tribe, and nation, we'll see them together. in Revelation, in these different groups there in the throne room of heaven. We see the 24 elders, and we see the 144,000, and we see this group of people that were harvested there towards the very end, right before God pours out his wrath in the form of those 7 bowls. So we see these different groups of people, and they're different tribes, tongues, and nations. None of that matters at that point. So we're kind of having to go through a lot to get to that point. I mean, even still today, obviously, there are issues between tribes, tongues, and nations. I mean, we see it all the time when people go to war and people fight in the streets over, different things. So, but yeah, that's the good news. There is coming a day when none of that will matter, what your ethnicity is and your language or any of that. So, all that to say, here in this situation, they were separated because that was the custom. It says, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Eating bread with the Hebrews would be an abomination. You just don't do it. It's a no-no. Verse 33. And they sat before him. So they were all in one room. It says they sat before him. Okay, so this is interesting. They sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled at one another. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they were all told where to sit. They didn't just come in and sit where they please. Oh, make yourself comfortable. Make yourself at home. My house is your house. It wasn't like that. It was probably they were all told exactly where to sit, right? The Hebrews were told to sit in this section, and they were probably told which chair to sit in. And so they're looking around and they're marveling at one another. That's the brothers, because they're seated in the order of their birth. The firstborn being Reuben, the youngest being Benjamin, they're seated in that order. And of course, no one would know the order of their birth. I mean, you could take a stab at it and you might get a few of them right, just based on, how old people look. But these brothers were fairly close in age. I mean, they were kind of born boom, 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 boom. It's, in pretty rapidly after one another. It wasn't like, one was born and then 20 years ago. You get my picture. It was, you wouldn't have been able to look at these guys and just put them in order. But Joseph knew the order of their birth, and he had them set down in the order of their birth. And so they're sitting down, at the table, and they're like, oh, okay, all this stuff is happening. And then they notice that they're set in the order of their birth. And it says they marveled at one another. And of course, they still don't know that this Lord of the land, the owner of this mansion, that this home that they're in now, they're about to eat with this guy. They don't know it's Joseph. They have no idea. So they marveled at one another. Verse 34, and he took and sent messes. That's the food. He sent messes unto, let's eat. He would have ordered the people to bring out the food. So he had food sent to their table. It says he sent messes unto them from before him, but he says Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. Which, I mean, I don't know if there's any depth to that number 5. The only other time we see it that I can think of was the 1/5, right? They stored 1/5 of the food during the time of plenty. 1/5 of that food. Now he's getting, an extra portion, 5-time portion, than his brothers. Which, it's kind of indicative of that idea of the firstborn getting the double portion, because they do talk about so much as any of theirs. So I don't know. I don't know if Joseph in his heart is kind of sending a message that Benjamin is now considered firstborn among these 12, which that's not what's going to happen. Joseph is actually going to be considered a firstborn, and his 2 sons are going to be considered. So when Jacob does die later, we're going to see that the double portion goes to the sons of Joseph. It doesn't go to any of the brothers. And again, if you're new here, I like to talk about that double portion a lot, and the whole idea of the inheritance, only because it connects to you and me. That idea of heirs, because believers in Christ are co-heirs, and we're given the promise of so much. We are given the promise of so much. I mean, eternal life, to live in the presence of God, to live in the place that he's prepared for us, the holy city of Jerusalem, these different things, which are amazing, and so much more, a glorified body. And we're going to be given responsibilities. And that's going to be different for everybody. The parable where too much, for those who are given much, they're responsible with that much, they're going to be given so much more later. And to those who weren't responsible with what they were given, it's going to be taken away. So there's this idea, this picture, this pattern of this idea of an inheritance that people receive. So I don't know. He gives Benjamin 5 times as much food, and he's the youngest. But that's the end of chapter 43. We'll go ahead and quit there, and a little bit of a cliffhanger there. That's not the end of the story. There's a lot more greatness to it. It's a really, really great story. So I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue through this story. Again, there's only 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. We're just finished chapter 43, so we're really coming in on the home stretch here. And I think we'll just keep going, and we'll do the book of Exodus after this, because it just really leads right into the next story, which of course is Moses. And basically, just spoiler alert, that's okay. Basically, this group of people is going to, once everybody's reconciled, and you've heard me say it before, Joseph is going to say, what you meant for evil, God intended unto good, to save many lives. And he's going to bring Jacob's whole household there into Egypt for the remainder of that famine. And they just stay and set up camp there for generations, until many generations later, when everybody else, these original people are dead and gone. New Pharaoh, new Israelites, it's all new. That the Pharaoh looks at these Hebrews and goes, they sure do procreate it quickly. they're growing, their numbers are growing quite quickly. And so he starts to eradicate that. And they are in captivity at that point. They are the slaves of Pharaoh. And then we're going to see them crying out to God for freedom. They want to leave, and they want to go back to their homeland that they've heard of, this land of Canaan. So they're going to cry out to God, and God is going to raise up Moses, who was actually a Hebrew by birth, but raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. So we're going to hear that story, and how eventually in the big story, how he delivers his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt and back into the land of Canaan. So what we're seeing right now is the Israelites going into the land of Egypt from Canaan because of this famine, and because that's where Joseph is, and their family is going to reconcile there, but they just end up staying there. For whatever reason, they don't go back to Canaan. They're probably very comfortable there. Joseph makes them very comfortable, but then as the generations go on, they get a really bad Pharaoh, and they're taken into captivity, and then they can't leave. So it's this really, again, this full circle of the Hebrew nation, starting out just, Jacob and his 12 sons, going into the land of Egypt, and then staying there for many centuries, and then finally being set free and come because of supernatural miracles that we're seeing. Just a really incredible book in the Bible. And as far as that goes, lots of really crazy stuff happens, lots of miracles, but they're finally set free. And that's why the book is called Exodus, because they exit Egypt and go back to their homeland. So that's it for today. So my prayers for you guys, as always, that God strengthen you, that he's giving you strength. I would ask for prayers, just, I mentioned, I won't give any details, but just for resolution and what's going on in my life. I would really appreciate your prayers for God's resolve in a really hard situation that's, coming up on 1 year now. It's really hard to be patient on the Lord sometimes when you just want things to be fixed and you don't know how to do it other than, like I said, doing something that you don't believe is right. It's really hard when you're put in a situation where you feel like the only way I can resolve this situation is if I do something that I don't believe is right. So I would really appreciate your prayers, but I'm praying for you, my viewers. Thank you so much for joining me. May God strengthen you. May he provide for all of your needs. May he protect you from evil, and may he give you a great faith. And once again, my best, and I know this isn't for everybody, because not everybody likes to read, not everybody can read, not everybody is a good reader, not everybody has the ability to really go into the scriptures and gain really a whole lot from them. But the scriptures we are told that they are alive, and and very powerful. And so even if that's the case, I would just pray, because I prayed for many years that God would give me a real hunger and a thirst for the word of God. And it didn't happen overnight, but it happened. But I had to pray that prayer for a long time. And in God's perfect timing, he really helped me to start to really just kind of open up the Bible to me, help me to see the bigger picture a little bit better, and have a real thrill and an excitement when it comes to reading the word. I mean, I just get tickled. I really do, over, being in the word, and just like, I don't know, I just do. I get really giddy and excited about things. Some things just kind of blow my mind. Other things, just like, wow, that's not cool or whatever. So some things really kind of are frustrating and confusing, but it's all good. It's all really, really good. And so I really do encourage you to be reading your Bibles in whatever ways you can, if it's a scripture a day or a chapter a day or however works best for you. But be praying, if you're struggling, be praying that the Lord, and I'll pray that over you now, that the Lord would really give you a hunger and a thirst for his word. He gave us his word for a good reason. And if we're in it, that's really the way we can hear God speak through his spirit that lives in us. So try to get into your Bibles this week as best you can. And God bless you, and thanks for watching. All right, so we'll go ahead and finish it up there. And I got to find my button and hit end stream. So, all right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching.